I'm Anna Foster here in Jerusalem. Now, Israel has said that it plans to move displaced Palestinians from Rafah at the southern tip of the Gaza Strip into what it's calling humanitarian islands in the central strip ahead of any military ground offensive that would happen in Rafah. Now, this has been reported this morning by the Associated Press. Not a huge amount of detail of what those humanitarian islands would look like or how exactly they would work, but Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari is quoted as saying that they would have temporary housing and they would have aid for something like 1.4 million Palestinians who are currently in Rafah at the moment. As I say, it's right at the very southern end of the Gaza Strip. It's where more than half of the population is now sheltering. And it's a place where Israel has said that it needs to carry out a military ground offensive because it says that in order to achieve its stated aim of fully removing Hamas from Gaza, the only way to do that is to target Hamas's remaining surviving leadership. And they are believed to be in and among those civilians who are sheltering in Rafah now. Now, of course, this remains an operation which has questions attached to it. Certainly the use of the word islands is an interesting one because the central part of the Gaza Strip has been left severely damaged by months of Israeli ground and air attacks. People who live there have left their homes. They'd be going back to those areas. But of course, the buildings that they were living in, many of them are not left standing and are not habitable anymore, which is why you see down in Rafah those thousands and thousands of tents that people are living in. The flow and supply of aid is very limited. Of course, Rafah is the main route by which aid gets into Gaza at the moment by road, and there's continuing pressure on Israel as well to try and actually increase the amount of humanitarian aid that's going in. Now, on those humanitarian islands, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that he is yet to see a plan or details of a plan from Israel about how they would protect civilians during a military ground offensive in Rafah. But he also said that it was important to see a plan to make sure that civilians were moved out of harm's way. Now, we're also looking today at the progress, we've been following it here on BBC News over the last couple of days, the progress of what would be the inaugural ship to use this new maritime aid corridor that was announced by the EU last week and has been set up between Cyprus and Gaza. Now, a Spanish ship, the Open Arms, run by a charity, set off from Cyprus on Tuesday. It's towing a barge with around 200 tons worth of meals that have been provided by World Central Kitchen. Important to say, though, that when it arrives in Gaza, there are a lot of challenges that it will face. Now, we know that it is approaching the coast, but in terms of an actual timescale of when it might arrive and start distributing that aid, World Central Kitchen before now have said they've been reluctant to give an official timetable. And you can see why, because there isn't a port or proper jetty or dock or anything like that on the coast of Gaza at the moment. So what World Central Kitchen have been arranging actually in Gaza is the building of this temporary pier to try and receive the aid from the ship, actually using in some cases rubble from destroyed buildings to try and build some sort of structure that this barge could come up to and then they could unload the aid. Now, that is the first problem. Of course, the second issue that they will face is how, when you are surrounded by so many desperate people, around 300,000 or so believed to still be in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, how you securely and safely and fairly as well manage to distribute that aid among the people who are so desperate for it. And we've seen aid convoys swamped by people in the last few weeks. There was that occasion where more than 100 people were killed around an aid convoy where IDF soldiers opened fire. They said that they felt threatened by the crowds. We saw some people actually crushed under the wheels of the trucks that were carrying the aid. So we know that even as that maritime corridor starts to build and more ships start to come in, that those issues will remain. And of course, the scale of the need is not diminishing. In fact, it's getting greater all the time. And that is why the international community say that they are continuing to put pressure, diplomatic pressure, on Israel to allow more and greater volumes of aid in.